46, Tuesday, October 12th. We'll get this FAC meeting in progress. This meeting is being held electronically as per section 19-1 of the town's procedure bylaw, number 6228-19 as amended due to the COVID-19 situation. I have a motion to approve the agenda as circulated by Legislative Services. Okay, it'd be Tom and Michael. Okay. Questions or comments on the agenda? None, so I'll call the vote. All in favor? Okay, passes. Any pecuniary interest? None whatsoever. May I please have a motion to receive the meeting minutes of September 27, 2021, moved by Michael, seconded by Tom. All in favor? That carries. Okay, so we don't have any delegations. So the first item is the memorandum from Senior Financial Management Advisor regarding the fiscal strategy, strategic action plan. We have a mover and a seconder. It'll be Michael and Tom. So I'll leave that to Rachel to start us off.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this memo and the attachment covers a number of the actions that were identified in the fiscal strategy that came to council earlier this year. So this is a bit of a plan that we've put together of things that we're going to tackle over the next few years to enact the fiscal strategy and hopefully make sure that we stay on a financially sustainable path. A number of the items do get involved through the budget, and there is some reporting through the budget, and there's a fair amount of policy work that's involved in some of these actions over the next year or so.
Okay. Any comments or questions? Michael?
Thank you. To Ms. Wainwright Van Kessel. Just overall, I mean, the plan looks good, certainly lays out all of the different priorities and things to tackle over the next 3 to 4 years. I did notice that some have starred indicating that a council decision is required, but council is not required for any of the other ones. You don't feel?
Ms. Wainwright Van Kessel.
Through you, Mr. Chair, some of these items are policies that would be based on what was included in the fiscal strategy, and the CAO has the ability to be able to approve those policies. However, there are some policies like a debt management policy where we think it's important to come back to council with that policy framework to make sure council agrees on the overall objectives. So things that are very much aligned with the fiscal strategy and follow what was included in it and how it was approved, those are simpler items that can be done. And some of this is documentation, so internal documentation that needs to happen as well. So that's where council does not need to be as involved in those areas. But anything where we feel that it's important that a decision is being made, or we're setting policy objectives where council has not had an opportunity to review and weigh in on them, those will come for council decisions.
Thank you. I guess my only comment is just to, give some consideration to, in some situations, either seeking input from this committee, be it this term or next term, or just members in council in general. Perhaps it could help support the overall development of certain policies, just to also get the perspective of the members around the table or the committee. So that's my only comment. Otherwise, it looks good.
Thanks, Mike. The one comment that I have, I'm not sure if I'm straying from the core report, is that when I look at the Appendix A, you see 26 different policies or master plans that go into this strat plan. And when you look at a strategic plan for an organization, what everyone does has to work towards the strategic plan. And I'm not sure whether our employee or staff performance appraisals are linked to our strat plan in terms of their daily tasks, their projects. Everything should be rolling up to the strat plan. And so, but I'm not sure if it's just me, but when I think of it from a council perspective, I see the strat plan, up here, and I see the official plan over here, and I see all these other plans somewhere in the plan universe, kind of with a dotted line, and there's not a real clear path going into the strat plan. And so I guess my question is there a way that we can harmonize everything that we do from council to each individual staff member and roll it up into their roles and responsibilities to the strat plan so that everyone's clear on the objectives of the corporation? And as an example, I was thinking, last week, in the risk management plan, we saw, one of the risks was, too much work given by council. And, that certainly is a risk in that, there's some councilors over the years that, puts up notice of motions that take up valuable staff time. So like, even if you could take it back with staff, Doug and Rachel, in terms of, shouldn't even counselors and their notices of motions kind of roll up? How does your motion roll up to our strat plan? And if not, then staff shouldn't waste their time on it. So I know I'm kind of going off the borderline here in terms of what this report is, but as I was looking at, the strat plan and reading the report, that's where my mind was going to, that everyone, including council, should be thinking about the strategic plan and everything they do, including council. And because we have a tendency to put up stuff like chickens and hens and stuff like that, that may not roll up to a strat plan. So anyway, that was my thought, and I hope that you guys can kind of take it away. And if there's any way you can use those comments for efficiencies in the organization, that'd be great. Michael?
Sorry, just to follow on that. The list is pretty extensive in terms of Appendix A and the 26 plans and policies identified, but I did notice the strategic plan in there. And I just wonder if there's any particular reason why the strategic plan itself, since it kind of drives some of these objectives and our goals, isn't listed as one of the existing ones with a timeline for an updating, because I think it's certainly overdue to be updated and brought into either next year or 2023. Perhaps through you to Mr. Nadarozny.
Yes, I would think that the strat plan would be updated for the next term of council. We looked at the strat plan this term of council. We didn't really do much to it. We kind of, re-endorsed it, I guess, to be the best way, council's overall strategic plan. But yeah, I think that would be something that would be worthy of reflection as well. If I might also take the opportunity to comment on Councillor Kim's comment. I mean, I think staff would be very pleased to have something along the lines of what was suggested as our barometer to what is an appropriate motion or an appropriate direction for council. But I think the reality of it is that there's many a strategic plan that are passed by council and then, for example, not really funded at budget time, and so you're kind of stuck between a report or a plan that you've endorsed, but then you haven't for various reasons you haven't given the resources to actually move forward. So, and that situation exists quite often. So I think to suggest the opposite, which is that once a plan is agreed to or is on the table, to not allow a motion or something that distracts from it or is contrary to it, I think would be problematic for some councillors who may want to adjust things through the course of the term or the year. So I get where you're coming from, Councillor Kim, but I just think we'd have to really think about whether that's easily done in a way that wouldn't be seen as offensive or controlling from council's perspective.
Tom?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I was just gonna, like, on that one appendix with the 26 plans, I mean, you see, I think 17 of them are in 2022, and I'm just wondering, does it, and Rachel, maybe you can kind of elaborate on this, does it make more sense for us, or maybe Doug, if you want to answer this, does it make more sense for us as a organization to look at doing these, not having the bulk of them all done at the exact same time? Or is it better that we do them all at the same time?
Doug?
Yeah, it's probably not logistically smart to have them all done at the same time. You're right, although it would be convenient to have a fresh restart and have them all. So I think there'll probably be a sort of a mixed approach. We'll do as many as we can. The ones that are important, that they all be aligned, especially any ones that have to be aligned together. We would try to do all those in short order, but some other ones, just to balance out the material and so on, might be over a longer period of time.
Okay, thanks. And then just one that just caught my eye, just as it's more of a wordsmithing thing, but it says citywide. Can we just make sure that it references townwide instead of citywide? That's a piece of software. Oh, sorry, through you, Mr. Chair. That's a piece of software. That is the name of the actual software. Oh, is it? Yeah. Okay. Well, they should change their software when they're dealing with a town. Let's call it townwide. So I'm just, you know how us Aurorans feel when we start putting the word city anywhere. So I just thought I'd throw that out there. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. And just to kind of circle back then and conclude, and thanks, Doug, for your comments. And I totally agree. And I thought of that as well, because there's a lot of motions that council put forward that doesn't conveniently roll up to the strat plan, and it's things that are necessary. And so the example I gave was probably not the best example, but I think you guys know where I'm coming from. Is that we want motions, just like I don't think we should be any different from staff in that we focus our our energies and time on things that predominantly in the direction of the strat plan and increasing the livability and quality of life in Aurora. So that said, if there's no other comments or questions, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? That's great. That's unanimous. So the next item 2, it's a memorandum from Manager of Financial Management regarding proposed 2022 budget introduction. Can I have someone to move this, please? Michael, seconded by Tom. So I'll put that to, is that Jason?
We can have Jason speak. Oh, getting to speak that. I can speak to that, unless we really want to hear from Jason.
Go ahead, Rachel.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this report is just a bit of a preview into what the budget is going to have at a high level. So the budget will be tabled on October 26th at council. There'll be a presentation, and members of council will receive their binders if they would like a physical copy, or there will be also access on the website and through eScribe. We have had a lot of work to do through this budget. So the capital budget resembles very similar to last year with the Capital Budget Authority, and we are looking at adding some more capital budget authority in some new projects, and we'll have those lists that will identify where there's any changes or new capital budget authority that we're looking at moving forward with. We also are closing a number of capital projects too. On the operating budget side, we have worked really hard to manage a drop in assessment growth. So with the pandemic that happened last year, there was a period of time where basically construction shut down for a while. So there is some delays in the actual growth that's coming through. We are still working towards hitting the 1.2%. Actually, October 26th, the day councils will know the final numbers, but we're getting close to that percentage right now. And even with trying to find savings of equivalent of 1% in assessment growth to maintain that 2.9% levy, we've strived to do that through revenues and efficiencies. So that is where we are currently at, and gives you a little bit of insight as to what is soon to come.
Thanks, Rachel. Michael?
Thank you. And thank you for those explanations as well, Rachel. I just wanted to touch on it in a little bit more detail through you, Mr. Chair, to Mrs. Wainwright Van Kessel. So on page 3, you did make note of the fact that the assessment growth we had originally intended for 2.2%. It most likely will be 1.2. You also speak to the fact that waste and wastewater will be 3.3, but yet we had budgeted for 2.9. And of course, the inflationary pressure that we are seeing across the board is certainly more significant than what we would have anticipated in the past. And yes, I do note the comment where staff have worked diligently to contain this pressure and meet the 2.9% approved last year. I think that just for myself, when we come to the budget discussions later in October, I think it would be good to at least either provide a little bit more detail of how we have managed to offset these pressures to maintain that number, and or just some assurances that service levels aren't being impacted, because I see a lot of effort being going into making sure that we keep it in line with our fiscal policies. But at the same time, I want to be able to assure residents that, as you said, this is through some revenue and some efficiencies and other actions, and it's not necessarily at the detriment of any services or expectations. Other than that, I'm fine with the report.
Tom?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to quickly just touch on the water wastewater aspect of it, and that it is 3.3% this year. That's what happens, and we talked about this many times. That's what happens when you do zero in previous years. When you do zero, you got to catch up. And that's what's occurred here with the water and wastewater, is that the region did 0 2 years straight, and you have no choice but to do 3.3 at this point to start to get caught up. Otherwise, the more you keep it down low, you're just passing the buck down the line, and eventually you're gonna end up with a skyrocketed rate of like anywhere from 5 to maybe 7%, and that is totally unacceptable. And so the only way you can manage that is by doing exactly what we've been doing from a budget standpoint, is minimizing the ups and downs and trying to stay consistent to be able to provide the services that our residents expect. So if any of you do want to, Michael or Harold, if you guys want to chat more about the water, wastewater, and the rest of the council as well, I can touch on that a little bit more. And I'm sure Ms. Wainwright Van Kessel can describe what's happened at the region as well in regards to that. So I just want to make mention of that because it is an important fact. I mean, we've talked about it time and time again. Why, my opinion, and I believe the majority of council, we do all agree that it's irresponsible to have a 0% increase, whether it's on our taxes or water, wastewater. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Tom. And, I think my comments, I found that with the municipal CPI, it's very much a laggard. And I noticed that it comes up in our municipal increases much later than from a regular industry perspective, from a financial market perspective. And, the last 20 years of globalization has kept down inflation pressures all these years because there's been globalization and wage is roughly 40% of overall CPI. But, with COVID and supply chains being hampered and indeed repatriation of supply chains, from my view, I see these not tax pressures, but that too, but inflation pressures over the next 3 to 5 years before it might settle down. And so, if staff can provide some options to council in advance of, next year's budget or in future council budgets, that'd be great because, inflation certainly is going to be an issue that we're going to have to deal with. Although, we've been very fortunate that we're dealing with low single-digit inflation over the last 20 years, and I think people are surprised when they see a 4%, but they haven't lived through a 1980s where my dad financed his car for 14%. It's nothing like that, but I think from what we've been used to over the last 20 years, it's going to be a shock to some, even going up to 4%. Tom?
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, I just want to add to that. I mean, that's why I think that earlier in the year, I think this was before you jumped on, we discussed at Finance Advisory Committee the fact that even though it's a good principle that we've put in place is inflation plus 1%, what happens when inflation starts to go up beyond that 2% mark? And, you know, it's 4 or 5%. Council would never approve a 5-6% plus 1 as a tax rate. And so, you know, we need to look at how do we move forward, and what is the true principle that we're going to continue to move forward with when it comes to setting that tax rate target, as you know, when we do the multi-year budgeting, especially when you enter into a new term, because if you just stick to the inflation plus 1%, you can end up with some pretty high numbers.
Thanks, Tom. I see Councillor Gilliland's online. Councillor Gilliland, did you have any comments or questions at all?
No, not so far. I'm just listening about all the inflation, and that was a good point that clearly we're not going to be putting a 6.1% tax levy based on what we're going through now. My only comment would be is that just based on the inflation that we're facing right now, and we haven't even really had a look at what the new monetary policy is going to look like this October 24th on the federal side and the Bank of Canada, it could take longer than 4 to 5 years to kind of get out of it. I would predict it could take a lot longer. That would be my assumption. That'd be my only thing. So I think it is good to look forward and how you would deal with the inflation and how it's going to affect us a bit more long-term than say 4 or 5 years. Sure.
Thanks, Rachel. And yeah, any talk about future is all speculative in nature for sure. Okay, so if there's no other further comments or questions, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Okay, that passes. Okay, the third item and last item is the memorandum from the director, procurement modernization project update. Could I have a mover, please? And Michael and Tom will second it. Rachel, you want to get us started?
All right, through you, Mr. Chair. So part of the capital budget this year included a procurement modernization project. So as we know, we're having some challenges in the procurement area. Our procurement is not as effective and as efficient as we need. And when I speak of procurement, I'm not just talking about the procurement team, I'm talking about procurement across the organization, because many people have a role in procurement, whether it's defining the scope of work or managing contracts or actually doing the bids themselves. So there's a lot of work that goes into this. So what we did was we hired on the procurement law office. So they are lawyers that specifically work on procurement items, and they do a lot of this type of review for various municipalities. So this memo gives an outline of the radar report that we had them do. And what they do is they take this radar report to identify some areas and recommendations. So I will say that, you know, that them being lawyers, they are fairly tough markers. So I probably should have included some of this in the memo, but to get an actual A from them is what they call exceptional and very rare. Very few people get that B level, and they consider good or a C to be quite common and kind of what we should be striving for. The good thing is on the overall radar report, we didn't have any of those red items. So those are where there's either rule breaches happening or potential for those breaches. So it puts us in fairly good company when we do our comparison to some other municipalities and where they start out at before we go down this path. So the next stages in this would be, as we move forward, enacting some of those recommendations, coming forward with a new policy and protocols, which will develop the new procurement bylaw, and then also the implementation of the new ERP system where we can start automating the workflow for procurement, and that should help things keep moving. So there's no confusion over who needs to be doing what during the stage of the process. And it happens when you have a fairly manual process as we do right now. So that is where we're at. I know it's a big report that's attached to it, and there's still more to come as we try to enact the improvements that this identifies.
Thanks, Rachel. Any comments or questions? Michael?
Thank you. I guess I'll start it off. I have already had conversations with Ms. Wainwright Van Kessel as well as Mr. Nadarosny with regards to this report. I would agree that, that our procurement policy is not as effective and efficient as we want. And that's what my belief has always been. But I was surprised and a little bit shocked to read this report and see the ratings as well as the grades associated, and then go through the list and the amount of times that it talked about how we were lacking or inadequate with regards to certain policies or procedures or processes. And so I think overall, I was very concerned reading this, because I went back to last term when we did a procurement review and read those reports and some of the things we talked about there, because of course that was an organizational wide review that we conducted. And, a lot of, I guess, this wasn't picked up through that process last time. And so, I had conversations with Rachel and Doug with regards to this. And Rachel touched a little bit upon it about, with regards to their process, their markings and comparators. But I think that if this report were to go to council, I think some additional information should be included into it. I think there should be some conversation around the scoring and the metrics used within this report, some comparisons to the last time we went through this process and either why things weren't identified or what are some of the differences. And if possible, I'd love to see the comparators with various municipalities. At the end of the day, these are public reports, and I would hope that the other municipalities that have conducted this kind of environmental scan have also published these reports. And I'd like to see how it compares, because as Mrs. Wainwright Van Kessel mentioned, I guess the goal is to strive for Cs, and many other municipalities have similar Ds and Es as associated with us. But for my confidence level, I would like to actually see that from other municipalities, because, it was always my understanding that, by no means is procurement within the town of Aurora perfect, but it was more of a continuous improvement process wherever we were looking for these efficiencies, where there would be some gaps and they would need to be addressed. But, I've highlighted many things within this report that are concerning with regards to the lack of processes and or risk associated with it. And speaking of risk, I will just throw out that, we were scored 1.5, which is just above systematic failure. And yet our procurement policy did not make the top 13 list of key risks for the organization. So I'll keep coming back to that one. But, I just think that some of the key points that jump out of this, they need to be better addressed and discussed, so that not just members of council, but the public understand what's going on as well. Because I think, the picture it paints is bleak. And so I don't know if Mrs. Wainwright Van Kessel would like to add to those comments or not.
Ms. Wainwright Van Kessel?
So through you, Mr. Chair. So yes, we had some conversations about those comments earlier. And I do, if you want, I can share my screen, or we can just leave it to a report that goes to council. I can show you what some of the other radar reports look like, that overall graph. So I'll share that right now. And you'll see here, they don't actually identify exactly which municipality it is, because we don't know for sure if they've gone fully public with their reports or not. We're trying to make sure that we're very open and transparent as we go through this process. And you can see a number of them do have some red items. We had some green, yellow, orange, which is, it's a good starting place, but obviously we want to make sure everything comes to that green center spot. But they gave us an overview of some examples of other municipalities where their radar report started before they underwent this process on modernizing procurement. But yeah, I take the comments, and we can definitely improve things with the report that goes forward to council.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. Well, my only comment is that, certainly I was disappointed to read it. It was not an uplifting report, but at the same time, I'm not going to land-based staff for every single negative grade that the consultants put on, because I'm sure you guys are your own worst critic, and so I don't need to make more points on it. But one question I do have is that on page 2 of the report, at the very bottom, the last bullet, the third bullet, it says, in quote, "The inordinate emphasis of procedural compliance when compared to operational needs and time constraints is producing marginal results and placing future operational needs at risk of significant failure." So I'm interpreting that as saying there's too much bureaucracy and lack of flexibility in our current process. So essentially, there's too much bureaucracy. Am I interpreting that correct, Rachel?
To you, Mr. Chair. So what we are seeing, particularly in procurement, is once we get to $25,000, we are looking at going out with a full formal procurement process. So we are investing a lot of time and effort and not getting as much value add out of going with full procurements at that level. That's why one of the things that we're looking for in the policy is to provide better recommendations to do some more informal procurements to streamline some of those lower value ones, so we can really put the value add in those higher value items to make sure that some of those more, those $100,000s or so or $1 million projects can move along faster. Our biggest challenge right now is because the way the bylaw is written, there are a number of stages that need to happen at such a low dollar value that it's basically almost grinding to a halt some of the process, because there's so many steps that have to be achieved and the volume is so high. And as you know, as things get more expensive year over year, you've got more and more procurements that are going over that $25,000 threshold. So that's part of the recommendations that's going to come out of this, is setting up some more informal procurements that departments can run themselves, whether they be using pre-qualifications or rosters to be able to do that. So they've got pre-approved vendors that they can go to, and hopefully streamline the process and make it much more effective for those lower value items, so we can really focus on being more strategic in where we invest our time and effort.
Thank you. And, my last question, just in a more practical perspective, staff heard some of the critiques from the insurance and risk management consultant last week. And, they were chosen because essentially they were the cheapest. If our process was different, how would that have changed who the end consultant might have been in that procurement? Just as an example, I'm just trying to see how we can improve this and what that would look like.
So to you, Mr. Chair, that process actually went through an RFP. So they may or may not necessarily have been the cheapest. They would have been the highest scoring proponent. So price is a factor in that process, but it's not the determining factor in which vendor to move forward with.
So Mr. Chair, if I could just jump in on this one as well, just for some further context. The challenge with some of these RFPs, and particularly for the lowest bidder, is that in the process that we use, the lowest bidder, if you will, gets 100 points for scorer for that component of the RFP. And then everybody else gets a lesser degree based on how far off that price they were. So it does create some interesting scenarios where you have, bidders that maybe were farther apart from an analysis and a qualifications perspective and so on. But if their price is so low that it establishes, them with 100% on the, 100 points possible for the price. And then if everybody else who, maybe gave it more thought and did more, did a more comprehensive look at the work that they felt should be done, they wouldn't get, they may only get 80% of those points or 70% of the points. And we have seen occasions where, again, only when there's that big gap where it can, change change the direction of the procurement. So it's not a, it's just something we have to consider, and whether there's, there's some other leading best practices out there on how to deal with those situations. It could be that we, we look at that whole RFP process and consider different weighting, for example, of the price component, things like that. So there is some separate work to be done there. It's not just cut and dry in terms of building a system to go around the lowest bidder so that you can take the next one on the list that you like.
And just further to what Doug is saying, the policy that we've seen a draft policy, and it'll be coming to councils in the next few months. But one of the things it addresses is where you have someone who is significantly underbid everybody else. And it provides some framework around how to further evaluate if that price is reasonable and potentially throw out bids if it does not seem reasonable. Because there are circumstances where one proponent is so significantly cheaper priced, it may not be something that's going to be valuable to the tenant. And also through an RFP process, even on the technical component, they have to pass that before price can even become a factor.
Okay. Thanks, Rachel. And sorry, one note I wrote down is, the biggest critical risk area that I thought may have been missed, unless it's incorporated in one of the other 8 target areas, is the ability to target as many contractors or bidders as possible. Is that in there somewhere, kind of gelled into the other risk factors or criteria? Or because I noticed that over the years that there are some RFPs that are put out there or procurement needs, and there's only 1 or 2 bidders. And so I see that as a key risk. And if there's a way that we can expand the amount of bidders so that it's competitive and it's we have a more creative solution to what we're bidding for, I think that's optimal. Tom, I guess you have an answer for that. Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah, good. So Rachel, sorry. So is that inside one of the other critical risk areas, or was that just not mentioned? Or
so to you, Mr. Chair, I don't think that's specifically mentioned, but one of the things we do is we use bids and tenders, which is used by, I think, most municipalities within York Region. So we try to stick to very similar tools that others are using, so it does get a more broader audience from that perspective.
If I might, Mr. Chairman, just jump in and add to this as well. One of the ways that we can do this is we've already talked about the fact that we'll be bringing a recommendation to council to change the limit on the $25,000 procurements. One of the ways to get more bidders is to lots of times for a $30,000 bid, those businesses aren't interested in going through a formal process where they have to submit all kinds of paperwork and so on to try and secure $30,000 or $40,000 worth of business, particularly in the GTA market. They'd much rather spend their time on $150,000 tenders with a real upside. And so that is one of the ways that we think will bring some more bidders to the table with a little less formality for the lower dollar ones. Those are the ones where, if it's $26,000, we get a couple people either they're quite large and they have people around the office that can just, crank out proposals, or they're small and they haven't got any business, which should be a warning sign that they've got the time to do it. So those are the kind of ways that we'll indirectly get it at some of those things, not all of them, but increase the pool. The other thing I want to comment on that, though, is it's not just simply, I don't want committee members to think that this is simply about, making everybody's life easier, raise the limit to 50 and let us, go by. Rachel alluded to this earlier in terms of her comments about procurement not being just about the procurement department. With, let's say that the number was to be 50,000, and that would we would allow for a less formal approach. Part and parcel of that change is, putting more onus on the members of the CMT who are procuring these goods or who need these goods to take an active role in the procurement process and be accountable for the decisions and the informal or the less formal process that they are allowed to follow to expedite their business needs. So there's a real wholesale change that has to occur, not simply just saying, oh, it's, you know, it's too much paperwork for 25. Let's give everybody a $50,000 credit limit and let them go buy stuff with a credit card. That isn't the point of this. The point is to, you know, spread that workload and give, you know, the departments the tools they need to get the procurement. And that's where the reference earlier was made to you know, the placing the future operational needs at risk of significant failure. You know, that's getting a $26,000 service contract for a piece of equipment that takes too long, and we find ourselves in a period where we don't have anybody, you know, on call for us. And so that's where those kinds of risks come into play. And it's because, you know, even from a procurement perspective, quite frankly, from the operational department, you know, if you've got something where you need the product in your hand right now to get something finished, or you've got this service contract that's lingering because it's you know, tied up in paperwork, but you don't have a pressing service need at the moment, you know, you tend to spend your time on the things that are right in front of you. And then I've seen it on occasion where we end up in that situation where, you know, winter's coming and our winter tire, you know, supplier has not been signed up. We're between contracts and we're stuck in a process, so that we, you know, now we're panicking and, you know, buying a couple of pieces outside of any procurement process or outside of any like formal competitive process because we have an operational need. So that's where that reference comes to. So I just wanted to speak to the broader kind of aim that we have in making some of these recommendations eventually about the procurement process.
Thanks, Doug. Tom?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And, you know, ultimately, I think it comes down to us trying to create a procurement policy that provides us to be able to get the best value and the best product or service for our residents and for the organization. And so I think ultimately that's where we're going. And, you know, while it's very concerning, the report, when you look at it and you read it, to me, I'll be honest with you, it's not shocking to me. It's not a surprise to me what came back. I've talked about this last term. I've had concerns about procurement. I've always talked about that we need to change it. We need to modernize it. And I think a few other councils have talked about that. And I think that having our new director come in 2019 and evaluating you know, our procurement policy and looking how we move forward, and then us approving a capital project to move forward with this evaluation, I think is putting us in a good position to move forward and modernize that policy where we can actually provide the best value and get the best product or service at the same time. So I'm looking forward to seeing where we end up with this and how we create a better policy moving forward for the organization and the taxpayers in the town.
Thanks, Tom. Michael?
Thank you. Through you to Mrs. Wainwright Van Kessel again. You do talk about in the report in terms of next steps and working with the consultant to revise the policy as well as some of the process and protocols, but it's not clear in terms of all of the timelines associated. So I guess when can council, the organization, expect to have a new policy or procedure in place to address the shortcomings that have been identified here?
Rachel?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So we are looking at coming forward with a report to GC that will include the new policy and protocols. And we're targeting either the November 30th or early January for that report. And what will happen is, based on that report, we will develop the bylaw based on it. Like a lot of what's in that policy translates into the bylaw. It has a number of things in there that our current bylaw does not address, like managing contractors and dealing with, you know, when we have contractors that can become a problem, and how do we handle that? It addresses looking at using different formats of procurement. We're very limited right now in which ones we use, and this has a broader scope. Once that bylaw gets approved, at that point in time, then we really have to start turning our attention more to the change management and education across the organization. So this is going to be an organizational shift and a real transformation for the way that procurement is done at the town of Aurora. And it's going to take some time through education to be able to move forward with that. And we'd be looking at rolling that out as we go through 2022.
Thank you. And just as a follow-up question through you to Mrs. Wainwright Van Kessel, are there items within this report that we could put into place now, like in terms of reading it, that talks about some scheduled forms that, you know, we should be using but we're not using? It talks about the that throughout the organization, there really is a lack of understanding in terms of the process. And they talk about a procurement 101 training program. Can some of these things begin now to address these issues that have been highlighted, or do we really have to wait until the policy is approved and the bylaw in place?
Rachel?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So for the training on the actual procurement policy and bylaw itself, it's best to have the newly approved bylaw in place before we start training on it. I don't want to give people information on the current bylaw and then say, okay, well, no, actually, a number of things have changed, because the bylaw is going to change significantly throughout this process. We are looking at using some of the templates and the forms where they currently fit within our new bylaw. So for example, or within our current bylaw. So for example, our current bylaw allows for negotiation and negotiated RFPs. We haven't been using those, but we are going to be. We're planning on going out this month with the ERP system, and that's going to be a negotiated RFP that we're going to be moving forward with, because it's allowed within our current bylaw. So we're trying to move forward with some of those things as we go. It also includes some standard contract terms. So we're going to try to roll those out as quickly as we can, because that'll alleviate some of the pressure on our legal services group for some of those standardized contracts.
Thanks. I just think, where we can enhance the process now, let's try and take advantage and implement it. And, certainly look forward to bringing it to council. And, in my opinion, the sooner the better. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Michael. And one last comment is that I really was pleased to read about the Corporate Governance Committee. I recall several years ago, we only had one person in finance looking after procurement, and to now see this as a holistic and a corporate responsibility and teamwork, that's nice to hear. And so I'm looking forward to that. So there's no further comments or questions. I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Okay, that passes. New business? None? Okay, so someone put forward motion to adjourn. Michael, Tom, all in favor? Thank you. See you guys.